Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining Fett263 presents Fun with Saber Effects for Proffieboard. Probably got to shorten that because I think I've been messing that up a lot lately. But thanks everybody for joining tonight. So Brian Connor, hopefully he gets on soon. He actually had a question for me that I'm going to cover today regarding particularly blade angle, but just responsive controls for the site. Now, responsive controls have been around for a while. But they can do so much, so I figured it's actually it was kind of a good segue in. So I'll see if Brian gets on and walk through that, and then talk a little bit about color editing. There's been a couple questions on editing colors and stuff. Oh, hey, there's a chat. Hey, Max. Hey, Kim. Hey, Brian. Good, you're here. So try to cover a couple of those, and then if you have any questions, I'll try to answer any questions in the chat. First and foremost, we'll kind of get started with the what's going on with this computer. Sorry. So Brian, this was your question, your inquiry. So I'm gonna do this in kind of stages, just as kind of a learning mechanism. So at some point, I'm sure it'll click, but I'm still gonna finish out through everything. So essentially, actually with OS4 is when the responsive controls were added. And if you're not familiar with the responsive controls, essentially what it is it lets you apply parameters or actual, essentially, values from the gyro in your Saber to the effects themselves. So you have smooth swing, which has been around for Proffi since the beginning, which is using the angle and speed and all that stuff to apply towards the sounds. And then essentially in OS3, Frederick introduced swing speed, which was letting you apply swing, the speed of the swing to effects. And then I worked with Frederick to get the rest of the parameters in place. The two main ones that you'll see now are going to be blade angle, is what we're going to cover tonight. Twist angle is essentially, it's a related. So a lot of the things with blade angle actually translate to twist angle. The difference between the two, blade angle has to do with the X and Y movement of your blade, so pointing up, going down, whereas the twist angle is just that Z-axis, so actual rotation of your hilt. And that's based on if the board, if the USB is facing, or the SD port is facing, no, USB is facing up, or if it's down. That's the difference in twist angle. But in terms of how it applies to styles and everything, they're interchangeable. It's just the actual information is coming from a different use of the Saber. But I have this chart up because I made this a while ago, and it's still valuable. So in ProffiOS, for anything related to functions, which include the shapes, but also for a lot of the other stuff, everything is based on that 0 to 32,768 value. And that translates in a lot of different ways. So for, in particular for blade angle, 0 by default in the system is always going to be when your Saber is pointing, when the blade is pointing completely down. And then the midpoint would be a horizontal blade, which is your 16,384 being 50% between the two. And then when your blade is pointing up, that's always going to be, by default, 32,768. But what I'm going to show you tonight is you can do a lot of manipulation with those using other functions. And you can also do different things with blade angle beyond, just moving stuff. So I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of it, and then if anybody has any questions, post it. I'm going to switch over to my demo camera. So just so you know, in the in the style editor, you can see blade angle, and I've covered this before. Blade angle, twist angle, swing speed, all of those responsive functions in style editor, they end up basically just going back and forth. So the style editor, this little preview window, is basically just cycling as if you were continuously moving your blade, in this case, back and forth, but it's not the best way to show the actual translation stuff. So I have to do that live. So I'm going to switch to my demo camera. I'm going to check the mic, make sure it's good. So bear with me 1 second. Let me get, let's see, we got to get this active. Stream shows that, okay. And then hopefully my audio is not messed up. Can I see the chat? Not so easily. Hopefully y'all can still hear me. Get the Saber turned on. Peek at the chat. All right, I'll try to talk loud. I don't know if this camera mic has been
acting up on me, but let me get this in place. All right, so kind of some short demos, just explaining the basics, and I'm hoping you guys are hearing me. So these are obviously specifically made styles. So this style here, it's just a bump. Now this bump is going to use blade angle clean. So what that means is when my saber is pointing up, oops, gotta get on camera, that bump is going to be at the tip because that's the 32.768 value. So that's how blade angle normally works. When I move to horizontal, it's going to be in the middle of the blade. And then when I move down, it's actually going to be at the hilt, which is 0. So that's the normal actual movement of blade angle. And you can tell, this is where the name responsive comes in. It's always updating. So it's a very smooth movement all the time. And it's always going to stay that way. Now, let's change out to, so now this is going to be a scaled blade angle. So the normal blade angle is always going to go from 0 when pointing down to 32.768 all the time. And let me peek at the chat, make sure you guys are hearing me. Good, okay. Sorry, I saw chats popping up and I thought you guys couldn't hear me. So what I've done now is I've applied a scale to this. And what scale does is it essentially restricts the return value. But what it does with blade angle now is when I move down, it's actually going to stop. Now, you can't quite see it, but it's not going all the way to the hilt because I think I did like 6,000 as the restriction there. And then when I go up, I think I did like 26,000, so it doesn't go quite to the, quite to the tip, so the bump doesn't make it all the way to the tip. So putting a scale on blade angle, this one is still moving the normal movement, but what's happening is it's actually not letting it go to 0 and it's not letting it go above the 26,000. So you don't get that full end-to-end movement. So that's using a scale on blade angle, and I'll show you. I'm going to have all the values when I go over to editor. And then now this is this is actually the start point for the lockup effects, which I think was what Brian was actually asking. This is an inverted blade angle. So if you remember, when I'm pointing down, typically that means 0, and the bump would then move to my hilt. By inverting it, you invert it with a scale, which I'll show. Now when I move down, this actually moves to the end, and I actually put the scale on this, so this has the same scale, but now this is actually inverted. So pointing down goes to the end of the blade, and then pointing up goes to the hilt. And in normal movement, particularly for the responsive lockup, this makes more sense, because what happens is, this is where that whole responsive thing kind of came in, is if you're trying to block somebody and you're moving towards yourself, you want that block moving downward because you're trying to protect yourself, and as you're attacking, it would move away from you. But what ended up happening is we actually added another level, but I got to get to that. So this is the inverted, so what happens is it flips, and this has the scale on it, but it's inverted. Now, this one is actually, this is a restricted blade angle, which has some of its own uses. And what the restricted blade angle is you'll notice that bump is staying at my tip. And the reason for it is I've actually restricted the blade angle to only read when I go below horizontal. So when I go below horizontal now, I'm going to go, and again, I have the restriction of 6,000 instead of the hilt. But this one will only move while the blade is below horizontal, and then once it gets horizontal, it actually stays still. And this is done with a restriction on the blade angle, which is another method you can apply. So what you're going to see is I get all the movement of that bump below horizontal, but then once I get to horizontal, it doesn't move anymore. And I use this in a couple places, but I think this is tied partly to what Brian was asking. And then here's a combination of everything. And we're going to talk about this, so if I'm a little hard to hear, I'll be stepping into the camera. So now this is a combination of an inverted blade angle with a scale, and then it has the restriction on it. And this is what I use for the low blade and mid blade lockup. Now it's a little different on the lockup. I wanted to set this up as demo, but the concept is the same. So what happens on this is by having it inverted, as I move up, it moves towards the hilt. As I move towards my opponent to parallel, it moves away. But what's going to happen now is as I move below, it's actually going to start moving back up the blade. And this is using a combination of that restricted blade angle in the magenta that was just one before this, plus the inverted and the scaled movement. And the reason for this is actually just from usage. So again, the goal of lockup was to make it seem realistic that as you're struggling with your opponent, it would move, and you want it moving in real time. So I've seen some applications where it's like a jumpy thing. I don't know the boards, but it's not smooth. This is in real time reading that angle. And then by having it now, what would happen though is if you're in a lockup, in this movement, it's fine. This is how you would expect. This is, if you see the films when they're struggling, it moves. But if you had a low lockup and you didn't change this inversion, that lockup starts moving towards the tip. But if you watch the films, all the lockups are always really close to the hilt. So that's why I've added this blade restriction with an inversion so that I can have it. So if I am actually blocking down low, it's going to move towards my hands. And it was just for realism. Now you can obviously restrict things differently based on how you use it, but just from my usage, that's where this compound movement came in, which is I think what Brian's been trying to get after. But this is really just a combination of the 4 other methods I just showed, and we're going to cover them. But I wanted to kind of give this. So let me turn that off. Let me save some battery because I have time. I have something else to show. And this poor Saber has been being used a lot. All right, 1 second. I'll switch over. I'll catch up with chat. Let's switch this camera. Sorry, 1 second. Switch here. Here.
Move. Good. There we go. Sorry. All right, let me catch up with chat, everybody, and then we will, let's see. Wow. Okay. All right. Yeah, so Max, that's what I was kind of getting at earlier. This in Style Editor, the when you do blade angle, swing speed, twist angle, and sine is supposed to do that. The emulator essentially just moves back and forth as if the blade was always in motion. So that's what's happening here. And that's why it made it a little tricky for me to explain. That's why I did the demo. So if you're just joining me now and you missed the earlier demo, some of this might not be as connected. So when we're done with the live show, check the playback. But let's see. Yeah. Hey, Kyber Tech, thanks for joining. Let's see. Brian F., thanks for joining. I see your question, Brian. I'll get to Brian F., your question about Helper I Can Help. Hey, Meg2, thanks for joining. And Smooth Jazz Family's here. Gary Reed, thanks for joining. So, all right, let's see. Catch up, just make sure there wasn't any major questions. So if there was, I see one question on the in-out helper. I'll try to cover that at the end, all right? Let me, so don't let me forget, but if it slides through the chat, I'll go back through it. All right, so based on the demo, let's go into this. So this was the first example I showed. And again, if you didn't see the live demo, it might not make as much sense. This is using just normal blade angle. So the bump shape is set up, and that bump, the location of the bump is using blade angle, and that's what allows it to move. And then the width is fixed in this case, in all the cases. But this could also be a function of its own. But what ends up happening now is, as I was saying earlier with this chart, when you're pointing straight down, that bump location is going to be 0 normally. When you're pointing straight up, that bump location is going to be 32,768. So that means right now this is essentially meant to be pointing up. And now this emulator is going to start to move as if you were moving that saber towards horizontal. That would be horizontal. And then it's going to move as if you were pointing down. And it's going to keep doing that. But in reality, the effect, like I showed, is actually really responding to where that angle is. So blade angle itself, this is how it works. It's always going to do that. Now, for most cases, we actually always invert, which was the third instance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So now let's show the restricted. So this is a restricted one. And what you essentially, or not restricted, I'm sorry. This is the scaled version. So what we do is we wrap the blade angle. So again, it's just a bump, but the location of the bump has a scale on it. The scale is what puts a beginning and end limit on the blade angle. So what's happening in this one is we have the lower output limit set at 6,000. So the lowest it's allowed to go is 6,000. And then we have the upper output limit set at 26,000. Again, the blade is always 0 to 32,768. So that means it's going to get close to the hilt and it's going to get close to the tip, but it's never actually going to get there no matter what the blade angle is. So essentially with scale this is the lowest it can go. So this becomes your new 0 and this is the highest it can go. This becomes your new 32,768. So we've now scaled this one, and this was that second demo. And then what we do is, this is the more normal usage, at least for the lockups and stuff, is we actually invert the blade angle using a scale. But to invert anything with scale, you just flip it. So if you look here, so if you look here, my lower output limit is 6,000, my upper output limit is 26,000. What that is that means 0 is now 6,000, 32,768 is now 26,000. So when your blade is pointing straight up, it becomes 26,000. When my blade is pointing straight down, it becomes 6,000. To invert, all we do is flip them. So now I say my lower value is actually 26,000. So that means when the blade angle is 0, which means pointing straight down, the bump is actually going to be at 26,000. And that's what inverts that action. And then obviously the flip of that is now when my blade is pointing straight up at 32,768, the actual value of the location of the bump is going to be the 6,000 mark. So what this is doing now is this is actually when my saber is pointing straight up, this is now what's happening. And when my saber is pointing straight down, that's what's happening over here. So this is that, actually put it back to blue so it matches to the demo. All right, so hopefully I didn't lose you guys. And then so this was the fourth step. I did it in magenta. This one actually has a restriction on the blade angle itself. So within blade angle, and let me show that. So blade angle normally, if you just look here, if you just put blade angle like this with just the opening and closing bracket, it defaults itself to being 0 to 32,768. If you want to limit, like we showed with the magenta one, and this one doesn't show up on the editor quite as well, that's where the demo comes in, is what's going to happen, it's going to still do its bounce back and forth, but the reality is in this instance, the blade, if your blade is horizontal or up, that bump is actually going to stay at the top. It's always going to be 32,768 is the return value, because I'm actually limiting the angle that it can return. Then when it moves below parallel, that's when it starts actually moving itself, and it moves through the whole range. So this, if you put the beginning, like in here, if I put a low point and a high point inside the blade angle, as opposed to using the scale. So this one, by not putting any value in the brackets, it essentially defaults itself. By putting values, you get two values in that bracket. You always want to put both in there. If you only leave one, I think it actually gives an error message, but if it doesn't, it makes things wonky. But this way, you can actually restrict what the return of that blade angle is. And then the final piece, which I think this is where we're working towards, and hopefully I haven't lost everybody, is we're going to have a blade angle in a scale. So what we're controlling in this one is we're controlling, this one I got to break apart for you. So this is what you're looking for, Brian. And I'll catch up with the chat. I see the chat running really long. I'm trying not to lose train of thought, but I'll circle back. So what's happening is we've got our bump. Our scale here is essentially the scale is the blade angle. But what I've done in this case is this is where we took everything, that all those pieces, and put them together. So our lower output value is actually now going to be a blade. So again, we're inverting it. So we inverted it. That's why this higher value is here, this 26,000. The lower value is the 6,000. That gives us the normal movement. When it's up, it's coming towards the hilt. When it's down, it's going to be moving towards the middle. But what we did is I added another scaled blade angle. And this scaled blade angle also has a restriction on blade angle. So this one, just like we showed with the magenta blade, when the blade is parallel or up, it's being ignored. It does not actually kick in until I did it a little below parallel, so it's a little less than 16.384. That was trial and error. You can make it whatever you want, but what we're doing for that second value is I am restricting the second value from changing until we get below parallel. So that means that the upper output limit, again, because the 3768 is related to it pointing up, is 26,000. So while you're pointing up or going towards horizontal, it's moving from the 6,000 mark up towards 26,000. And then when you get to parallel, all of a sudden now that blade angle is actually going to flip itself, because now we again went back to lower. So 0 being 4,000 and then 16,000 being the 26,000. As I go down, it's actually going to move back up the hilt. And that was the goal of that one is what I was showing at the very end, where when you have lock up above, horizontal, it's moving. As you move towards the opponent with the angle, it's going to slide up the blade. As you move backwards towards yourself, it's going to slide down the blade. But then when we get below parallel, it actually goes from being about mid-blade and then slides back up towards the hilt. And that essentially all it is we're just saying when you get below, so that upper limit changes, or that lower limit changes once we get below 16,000 in terms of the blade angle, and it actually flips back. So if you looked at it, the inversion is here. So the inversion is having the 0 be 26,000 and then the 0 be 6,000. But then I actually invert an inversion by going back and saying 0 is now 4,000, blade angle 16,000. In my head, it makes sense, but as I'm saying the words, I might be confusing you guys. So hopefully not. But that's essentially what we're doing is we're taking a bunch of functions and putting them all together. So we're taking essentially this piece here of the inverted blade angle, we're combining it with the restricted blade angle, and then that restricted blade angle actually has a scale on it that makes this all happen. So it's like those three pieces coming together actually creates this really compound effect. Where did it go? I jumped past my screens too quick. That one. So that's what's happening in the final blade that I showed. And let me see if there's questions. Let me catch back up with everybody. And let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Wow, the chat got really long. I apologize for missing so much. Okay. So scale, yeah, Max. So the scale, so let's build one real quick, right? So we're going to build, I'm going to just build it as an alpha layer again. That's the easiest way to get a shape in. So we'll just build a blue alpha layer. We're going to put the bump in. And if you just put a bump with just static, so a static position, so the first, typo. Oh, don't need that open. Then we do size. And then we close the alpha layer. So that's just building a bump, and a bump is that, again, that shape. And what we want to do is we're going to apply, if you want to apply any kind of a movement to it, that first value is what you're going to change. So if we just choose, again, the blade angle, and I'm sure there's other questions. I'm just starting with this one because it was first in the chat. So now if I just start with blade angle, this is going to be that actual first one I think I did in red in the video, where it's going to move all the way. So when it's 0, it's going to be here. When the blade angle is 0, the bump is going to be down here. So that means now this is representation of that. And when the blade is straight up, it's going to be 32,768, so it'll be here. If you wanted to limit that, that's where the scale comes in. So you would take your blade angle, and we're going to wrap the scale around it. And all the scale does is it's just limiting, and it's limiting it to a lower and upper value. So scale of blade angle, we'll say, we'll just do, I've been doing 6,000, let's do a 10,000 just for the heck of it. And then the upper value, let's actually just limit it to 20,000. That'll be a really short range of motion. So we're scaling blade angle. So your first input into scale, actually let's submit it so you can see. So your first is what's the input. Second is the lower limit. Third is the upper limit. And then when we look at it, what's going to happen now is it's going to also move very slow because of how this emulator works, because it is actually moving itself through the full range 32,768. But now 0 is 10,000, 32,768, and this scale is 20,000. That's not a large area of movement in terms of where the bump has to be, but it is a large range of movement for the blade itself. So that's why it looks slower. But if you put this on your blade, it'd be more responsive. But so scale just lets you limit it. And again, if you wanted to invert it, just put your higher value as your lower and your lower value as your higher, and all of a sudden it flips those values. Let's see, in-out helper. Let me get to in-out helper later. In-out helper is just for ignition and retraction, but it's a very limited one. In-out TRL is the one that is used on pretty much like 99% of my styles for a couple reasons. Let's see. So smooth jazz family, that is essentially where swing speed smooth swing comes in, is the hum sounds, or the swing sounds changing they change based on the speed of the angle change, but they're already tied to that. I've said it on other shows. I kind of stay away from the sound side of stuff. I've done a little bit with it, but it's not my area of expertise, and it's not my main area of interest. I am definitely the VFX type guy. I like to make stuff look cool, and then I trust others like Brian, who's helped me out, to make stuff sound cool. And I've actually tried to dive into the sound stuff for a few projects and a few kind of things I've been chasing, and I get so lost I have to go to Frederick, and I'm just, the sound side is definitely not my strong point. I mean, technically you can apply any setting to any sound, but the issue is because of smooth swing, that might really just mess everything up. Because smooth swing is using angles, it's just using speed, the change of angle speed, to determine how loud to play your swing H, swing L, and it's like a super complicated algorithm that I'm not going to try to pretend to know. Let's see. Cool, Brian. Yeah, hopefully this is helpful. Let's see. Oh, if somebody's experimenting with that, then that would be cool. If they could get it to work without making smooth swing all messed up, cool. If they mess up smooth swing, I would say abandon. Hey, James, thanks for joining. James is new here. Yeah, yes, Kim, yeah. I tried to break the discussion of angle into parts. Hopefully it kind of made it easier to understand. Hopefully I didn't confuse everybody. Let's see. Editor has a typo. The second field should say what angle returns. Yeah, this should say what angle returns 32768. That's, yeah. I know Frederick has a lot of edits for editor in his queue. He's obviously really busy with the V3 board. And I am bothering the heck out of him all the time with a bunch of stuff I'm working on, so I can't say I blame him for not getting around to this, but I'm sure eventually it's on his list of things to do. But yeah, that's just a typo. So this is the blade angle itself is what returns 32768 is that second value. So that's this value right here should be 32768, and that's that restriction that you would apply. So yes, in actually a very crazy compound way, but the real flame blade uses blade angle to do actually three things at once. If you're learning from this and you actually go pull that style down and look at it, you might be able to make some sense of it. But what we're doing with real flame is we're using the blade angle we're using an inverted blade angle, which is the scaled version, on the fire speed. So there's actually a mix of two fire speeds, and what it is the pointing up speed. So the 32768 value of the mix is a really fast flame, and then the 0 value of the mix when it's pointing down is a really slow flame. On top of that, there's a gradient in there that makes, if you choose the real flame color, which is the yellow, orange, red, the gradient itself is actually different between blade angles so that it can shrink the blade. And then lastly, there's actually a masking layer that causes it to look like the blade is shrinking. It's actually essentially a trick. What we're actually doing is we're changing a second mix of black, which turns the blade off, and your flame based on blade angle, so that when you get below horizontal, it actually causes it to look like the blade, the flame is shrinking in on itself. What's actually happening is it's being overtaken by a black layer. So it's a really complex one, but if you're learning blade angle stuff and you go peek at that one, you might be able to break that one apart. But it's doing a lot of different things. It's not just doing one thing in that. Let's see. Hey, Gary Reed, thanks for joining. Wow. Oh, the chat just jumped on me. Let me see. There we go. You guys must be chatting up a storm. This thing doesn't usually jump like that. Yeah. Oh, the eye. So I had it up earlier. The blade angle bump I actually apply to my Eye of Sauron style. That's how I get. There's two versions. There's one that's twist angle, one that's blade angle. But that's same thing, same concept is how you get that bump of the eye to move along the blade is using blade angle, and that one has a lot of restrictions because you want to still keep it somewhat centered. Plus, the flames coming off the eye are actually have to lengthen and shrink, and again, that's with a mix. But yeah, blade angle can do a lot of different things. Basically, it just makes it really easy if you want to have that blade respond to what you're doing with it. Yeah, I caught a little bit of your show last night, Meg Tooth. I had to cut out. My time is just getting away from me. My kids are back in school. I'm working really hard on edit mode for everybody, and obviously regular life. Let's see. Oh, we missed Late Dog. Sorry. Hopefully, yeah, you catch this. Who else? Yeah, Meg Tooth. If you guys don't watch Meg Tooth, especially if you're trying to build sabers. He's gives you a ton of info, and he's the one. For those of you who haven't caught the show before, he's the one who got me into Proffieboard and into sabers. So I would not be here today if it wasn't for Meg Tooth putting his videos out on Facebook. I caught his video for his original Teensy Saber Kylo Ren that he did, which I think was the Black Series, or where he had the flame effect, and it's a really old video, but that's what I caught. That's what made me decide I wanted to, because I do Kylo Ren for the 501st. I wanted a real looking saber. I went to him to try to get what he had. He was super busy, and I was nobody to him, and everything. But he kind of nudged me into, hey, why don't you try to do it yourself? And I did. And now here we are today. So everything from that point forward was, me being interested in what he was showing, him being, really helpful with a lot of things at the beginning. And now I'm able to, kind of enjoy this hobby and give a little bit back. Who else? Catching up. In the split blade, I like to get a bright light file in the middle. Yep. So in my split blade builder, that's what you're talking about. You'd have to add it. I don't have it built in as an option. But if you go to split blade builder, where'd you go? This list is getting too long. Just saw it. There it is. And if you actually choose blade angle as a control, and I'll just leave it as the defaults for that. I'm not gonna add anything. Let's get that style. Let's go here. Oops, I gotta grab out of this guy. Otherwise that would drop in. So what's happening in this one is, again, that this mixes using, this one uses smooth step, but you can still apply on top of it. Let's break this out to layers. And this is going to be really quick and dirty, so might not look perfect, but let's put a new line in. We'll add an alpha layer we'll just put a white bump in the middle. We're going to put it in the middle first. I always hit the wrong key there. Let's make it go a nice round to 10,000. So that's obviously staying still. Excuse me, I need a drink. My throat's scratchy. All right, so now what we got to do, though, is we got to mimic the blade angle that it's actually triggering, which is this guy right here. So this is handling the mix. So we're going to take this exact copy. I use Control-C, but I'll do it visually for everybody. I'm going to copy that. Go back up. Let's find my layer, which is going to be right about here. Let's put that into here. Sorry if I'm going too quickly. I want to cover a couple other things. Put that in, and that should do it. And now that white bump will follow your blade angle, because essentially what's happening is the bump in the middle is using the blade angle that's controlling this split. Now the split blades, if you go The split blade uses smooth step just because it's coming from the tip down. Smooth step is just, so bump is a spot anywhere on the blade. Smooth step is meant to be essentially a break. I forget the terminology Frederick used, but it has a reason it's called smooth step, but it's meant to be restricted to the tip and hilt. So if you're doing effects that you want to keep locked at the tip or hilt, you use smooth step. If you want something that moves along the whole blade but isn't anchored to one side or the other, a bump comes in. But if you apply the bump position, blade angle with a scale to the same value as the smooth step, they will follow each other because they're actually taking that exact same input. So if you rewind, you can probably do it, but that's all you would have to do. Pretty sure, and then play with the obviously colors and settings. Let's see. So this is all right. Getting around to it. So yeah, Brian, this was all I was going towards this for you, and I got sidetracked. Let's get actually let's grab a clean style because I've been messing around with too much stuff. Let's go just real simple audio flicker. Go red. Let's go grab, I think it defaults itself to low blade, so I'll leave low blade in. We're going to get the style. Let's go drop her in. We'll create a new, we'll put it in here. All right, so put lockup on. So this lockup, low blade, essentially what low blade is it's meant to restrict itself tighter to your hands. And I've had this question, I might have answered it before. Mid blade moves away from your hands a little bit more. It's really meant for how you hold your saber if you are kind of dueling with somebody in lockup. I just found myself a lot of times, particularly because I do it with my son, who's shorter than me, my lockup position ends up being a lot closer to my hands. First of all, because I'm 6'3" and he's not even 5 feet yet. Hopefully he hits his growth spurt. But secondly, it just felt more natural. If you're fighting a taller opponent, or if you just find yourself normally crossing up more in the middle of the blade, you choose the mid blade option. Both of them have the same scale. It's just the scale shifted from being mid blade to lower blade. But how you fix that, so if I want to change it, right, so this is my lockup TRL layer. And this is the bump that's controlling it. And what we said, right, so this is my blade angle in a scale, and it's inverted. So if I want to move it up the blade in the low blade, this is technically the high point. And this is we're restricting the blade, so this is for what's going to happen when the blade goes below. But technically what you have to do is you're moving this whole chunk up. So you can't just change one value because that's just going to spread it thinner. We're going to take this whole chunk of the actual lower point, which because of how we're flipping it is the high point, and we're going to slide both values up. So you're going to increase this value. So if I increase, well, let me show it before I do it so I can kind of, so what you're going to see, right? So it's going to go about here to the hands, and then it should get to about midpoint-ish, and then it'll flip itself back. It didn't even get to midpoint. The emulator is messing with it a little. I think it's too much going on. It should be about midpoint, I think. But at any rate, so it's not even getting midpoint. So if I go into this group, and again, this is the restricted lower output limit. If I move this value, let's take it up a good amount just so it's really noticeable. And then we'll flip this one up. Take you up nearly to the tip. Now what should happen? Oh, what did I do? I clicked something. Oh, I split it out. What? Hang on, what the heck did I do? I think that's the emulator. Oh no, it's a compound. Never mind. I know what I did. I have a compound color in. So it's 2 layers of lockup, so ignore that. So we're going to change the same value. What did I say? Up here I did 16 and 32, so this will become 16. Forgot I introduced the compound colors to the library. Change this guy to 32. Go back to you. That should stay in sync. So this is now going to move a much higher up on the blade. So Brian, I think this is what you were actually getting after. It actually is a pretty simple answer, but I wanted to teach about the blade angle itself. So you're going to see it goes up higher on the blade. And if you didn't want this actual fold back, So if you find now in the library, I actually have this already there. If you don't like the fold back, so and the fold back is the restricted blade angle when it gets below horizontal, that it starts working its way back towards your hands. Just go with the 3/4 blade option. The 3/4 blade does the inversion, but it actually, what it does essentially, it means is that the lockup travels 3/4 the length of the blade, so it doesn't get to your hands and it doesn't get to the tip. And that was this guy here, essentially, roughly. So this is the normal. This is what the 3/4 blade lockup means. It has no fold back, so when your blade is pointing down, it's going to be nearly to the tip. But if you wanted to edit out to do it yourself, you could either just pump up the 2 values in this restricted scale, or you could take this lower output limit scale itself and take it away and just put an int value in. Where's my int? If I just put an int in like that, I might submit that. Then what you'll get is this will then do the same exact thing. So that's essentially what you're looking for. Hopefully that answers. Let me catch a few more in these chats. So, oh, it broke again? Oh, that's because I didn't change the other guy underneath. Let me fix that because it's going to bug me. I took you out. And I put an int in. That should be better. There we go. Sorry, Smooth Jeff family. Blade style took the longest to create. Most complex is, there's a couple in there. Complex in terms of the visual effects that's happening can be several of them. The Kylo, so I always go back to my original Kylo Ren one. That one I spent the most time on. That one went through like probably 8 iterations. I think I posted 4 of them, but I had my own ones. I actually had, for what I would do is I would actually design the style in editor back then, put it on my blade, and then I would play the film, and I would hold the blade to the film and make sure that my timings were as close as I could get it humanly possible. Because if you watch the film, and I've watched it way too many times really close up, his unstable blade, on top of having an unstableness to it, there's a pulse effect that runs. It kind of looks like a burst of energies at the base, and it runs really quick at these intervals up. And getting that to do that timing took a lot of it. So it in terms of complexity compared to some of the stuff nowadays, it's not. But back then, it was a lot to get that effect to look perfect. And being OCD and being in 501st, I wanted it as perfect as I can get. So that one took me the longest to do, but it's not necessarily the most complex. The Real Flame, with all the blade angle stuff and all that one was another one that took a long time to get perfect, because of all the moving parts. So because it is using blade angle in like 3 or 4 locations for different reasons, you could, if you change one thing, you could actually throw the others off, and then you had to go kind of start from scratch. So the Real Flame one took a while too. But some of them, they take me a while more because I'm really trying to get it perfect. It's not necessarily that it's hard, it's just timings and color mixes and movement. I try to match as best I can. But the one that took me the absolute longest was going to be that Kylo Ren, the original Kylo Ren one that's still running on the library. It's been the same on the library forever. But that was because I put so much time into it from the start. Let's see. Yeah. Hey, sorry, Magtooth. Yeah. I mean, when the layers were introduced in OS4, it did change a lot. It opened a ton of doors, but for guys like you, and even originally, I mean, I was kind of hand in hand with Frederick on the OS4 development, so I was getting kind of inside info before everybody else, and I got to play with the styles and give feedback on them. But the change from the old format, which was nested, so, and if you're new to Profi, you probably never dealt with it. But the old way of doing styles is you would actually wrap each effect over another one. So it was called nesting, where you would have, so if you wanted to blast, your blast would be here, but then within your blast, you'd have your base color. And then if you want to do a lockup, you'd wrap it around the blast. And then if you wanted to do something, and you kept doing all these wrappings, And what it did was it actually made it harder to follow the style because you had to find your point in it. When Frederick broke out everything to layers, now layers came about because of the responsive controls, because if you tried to nest this type of control in the old format, it would just crash everything. There's actually a responsive controls was a huge step forward for styles, but it was so big when we were playing with it that Frederick actually rethought how the colors and everything were translated, and he came up with the layers concept based off of like graphic design programs where, you know, like a Photoshop or something where you layer stuff on top of it. And in doing that with his brilliance, it actually opened a ton more doors. So you get so much more functionality out of layers. But if you're used to doing, because you think about from OS 1.3, I think that was like the earliest one, or maybe it was earlier than that, all the way through OS 3.9, it was always these nested things that took a long time to learn. And then all of a sudden you had to scrap everything you learned and start from scratch. It could be a little slower to learn, but once you get the concept of layers, it opens so many more doors of possibility. Let's see. Thanks, Mountain Sabers. Thanks, Max. Yeah, Brian, I saw that. Yeah. Oh, wow. This jumped again. I missed a bunch. I get this. This is one of Jesse's videos that I get questions about all the time. He doesn't remember what style he used, and he asked me to break it down. And the problem is it was also, I think it was the 3.9 version, so there's not a direct one. There is in the library, but I think he built that style around the time that 3.9 was out. So I want to say it's from the 3.9 library. I believe it's an audio flicker, and I believe it just, so when people ask me now, what I tell everybody, actually, the one thing I can tell you is that he uses a power-up effect. He uses the unstable and white, and he uses this one. And the cooldown effect is the cooldown unstable and white. Now his camera is going to oversaturate, so that white is going to be super bright. And when I do my videos too, cameras, when you have white in particular, if you're in a darker environment, they saturate. So you almost can't see the effect itself on his video, but it is this one because I remember what was available. It was one of the only ones that was available. So it's essentially the power-up effect and the cooldown effect are an unstable white. I don't know if he used a random flicker or an audio flicker, or it could have even been, there was a couple other flicker effects back then because it's an older one. But the pieces that people mostly ask about is that ignition effect, which is it's a power-up effect and it's the unstable one. The original power-up effects from 3.9 were all unstable white because that was the original concept of it. And then now we've added a ton of them. Well, we've added a bunch of them in here, but essentially it's the unstable one in white is his power-up that he's using, and the cooldown is the unstable. There's only one unstable cooldown because of how the code works. So that's, I'm covering part of it with the chat. Sorry about that. Where's the, didn't show you guys. So the cooldown effect is here. So I'm talking and you're not seeing that. So that's this one here. So those two pieces I know he uses. The base effect, I think it's an audio flicker. It could be random flicker. But he doesn't remember the exact one because he got it so long ago. And again, it is an older OS. So they're, for OS 4 in particular, the library was completely rebuilt because the effects changed from that nested style to layers. So everything was rebuilt. I migrated a lot of the older styles over, but I also created this customized enhanced screen because the old 3.9 and previous libraries, the styles had all the effects built into them. So they had the blast, they had the power-ups, everything was pre-built. And what that caused was it really restricted it. With the customized enhanced screen, you get all this control of everything. It gives me more freedom to create, but also gives you more freedom to customize. So there's not a one-to-one relationship necessarily. Let me catch up to everybody. Oh, we're getting late. I'm going to try to get everything answered. If I miss anything, I'll try to cover it. Oh, I did promise early, the in-out helper. I don't want to forget that. And then I'll catch up to the, so in-out helper. In-out helper is, let's get a layer. Oops, need my L. And then I think I got that right. It's been a little while. What did I miss? Oh, it's once the function. I don't actually use an out helper anymore, so I'm a little rusty on this one, and I'll show you why. All right, I'm going to go this route. Let's put a black in. Layer, where are you hiding? There you are. What's your format? Oh, in out function. Oh, I have not used this in forever. All right, so in out helper, all it is it's a masking layer that's controlled by ignition and retraction. And what masking layer means is it's putting this, essentially it puts black over it, unless you have an off color, over the blade. So any layer below it, in this case just blue, is hidden by a black layer that's part of the function until you hit power. And when you hit power, it's going to take that function away. Now, in-out helper only does a wipe up and a wipe back. So, and it does it based at the times here. All my styles in the library use in-out TRL because you can change all of it. So I usually use this one, but it's the exact same concept. And this is the exact same thing that the in-out helper does. But so it's the exact same thing. So I'm doing a wipe out, doing a wipe in, but in-out TRL lets me change these transitions. So I can have my fade. So I can do a fade up and a wipe in. I can change to, let's do, where's this color cycle? No, color cycle, yeah, you need to run color cycle long. I can do that. So now I can have fade up and then a color cycle down. So with the addition of the enhancement screen and the ability for you to choose all these different ignitions and retractions, all the styles use in-out TRL. All it is it's the same concept though. It's essentially a mask layer that while the blade is off, it covers everything under it. Now, if you wanted, say, if you have a preon, you'll notice the preons will be over here, or any off behavior will be outside of the in-out TRL. So if we just do like red, actually that's not true. That's going to mess us up. Yeah, put that one more bracket in. So if you want an off behavior that doesn't appear after the blade is ignited, you're going to put it inside the in-out TRL. And what that is while my blade is off, it's red. And then when I hit ignite, it's going to wipe away that layer, or in this case, fade it to the blue. And then when I retract, is going to flip back to red. So if you want, with the in-out TRL and the in-out helper, if you put a color in the off, color when off value, which is the third parameter, that's what happens when your blade is off. Now, if you wanted something that's going to be visible both when the blade is off and on, you're going to put it outside of that layer. So we'll just put a bump just so we don't block everything. So let's do a hilt bump. I missed it. So what this now is this essentially it's an off behavior. It's actually a full-time behavior. And the in-out TRL has a black layer. I hit power. It's going to fade in the blue. It's going to cycle down, but this red is going to stay active all the time. So depending on the positioning of the layers is how it always gets visible. So hopefully that answers that. Let me try to catch everybody else. So Jesse does, Max, yeah, Jesse will occasionally ask me to design styles like his, the recent one, Shock Baton. He actually asked me specifically for a style for that. I did design it. I gave him the code. That's what he's using in his video. It's up on the library. If somebody asks me to design a style and I have the time, I don't mind doing it. Now, occasionally somebody will ask me for something really crazy and really specific. And it's not that I don't want to do it. It's just time. Like right now in particular, I'm crazy. But if somebody has ideas and they wanted something, I don't just limit it to font makers. If you have something that you really can't get built and you really want me to build, feel free to ask. I can't make promises of when I can deliver, but I don't mind helping build some stuff. I just time at times a little bit limited now. But yeah, I've built a few styles at Jesse's request. A few other font people have asked me, and I've helped them. Some of them want them for. So I kind of play. I'm being open source, but also the basis of my library. If you're going to ask me to build you a style, it's going to end up on my library. So that's been kind of a I want to say a rough point, but that's been a point where some people have been like, oh no, I wanted this to be just something for my customers. I'm not looking to do that. If you're going to limit the style and not make it available to everybody and make somebody have to buy your font to use it, I try to stay out of that. More power to you for that. That's not my area. Like I want everything to be available to everybody, especially if I don't get paid for this. So I do appreciate donations. I do know a few of you guys have donated to my library. I do appreciate that. But I do this for a hobby and for fun. So if somebody's going to be limiting something based on being paid and then I'm not being paid, that's kind of a fuzzy area. So I don't design stuff that's going to be limited based on purchase. Jesse asked for styles and he just says, hey, I'm doing this effect, this font. It'd be cool if you could come up with effect. I create the effect. I put it on library. He puts it in his video and everybody has access to it, whether or not they buy his font. So that's kind of where we go with that. Let's see. Hey, Carson, thanks for joining. I'm going to be signing out shortly. The preset config on your Proffieboard. It should be on your SD card. Most installers put a copy on the SD card. If they didn't, reach out to them and ask them for it. If they don't get back to you, join the Proffieboard support group and the open source group. You're going to have to recreate it if they don't provide it. You can't get it off the board once it's there. But most of the installers that I've seen put a copy on your SD card, so that would be the first place to check. Otherwise, reach out to them. Let's see. Yeah, layers have been great, Kim. You're right. Wow, this chat got really long. Sorry, guys, if I missed anybody. Okay, a few people answered your question. That's what happens when I don't keep up with chat. I'm answering questions that already got answered in the chat. Sorry, I'm trying to read all of these at the exact same time. Oh, I don't mean any disrespect about in-out helper, Megtooth. I because of the flexibility of in-out TRL, that's why I use it. In-out helper, if you want just to do wipe in, wipe out, that's exactly what it does, and it's pretty straightforward. So no disrespect to in-out helper. I haven't used it in a while because I wanted to open up that library with more functions. Yeah, that's cool. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, a lot of these styles have a bunch of hidden stuff that you never need to mess with until you do. And then when you do, it does get a little tricky. The .h file is literally the exact place to find it, though. If you're not familiar, I don't have my OS open. The .h file, so every single style, actually every function, every style, everything in a style has its own separate .h file. And what that is, so the bulk of them are going to be in the styles folder. If you open your styles folder in the OS, you're going to see all the styles written out in a .h. Within that file, you're going to look for the template. And it says template, and then in there, it's usually right at the top. It's actually going to tell you not only what everything means, but it'll also have default values. So if there's a value in there, that just tells the OS that, hey, this is the value to use here. You can change those. Most of the ones that Frederick defaults have like such a small usage that he defaults them just so people don't have to mess with them. But yeah, some of the stuff is pretty buried. I do know he puts some of them in here in the editor, and he hides them. And it's really, from how my point of view of it, I don't know his thinking. My point of view it is, if it's used very little, he wants to simplify the editor for people to use. But you can change all of those values essentially. Cool. I think I'm caught up. All right, I'm going to take a couple minutes. I wanted to show this tonight. I'm not done, but I wanted to show this. I'm going to take a couple extra minutes. Hopefully nobody knocks on my door. Give me one more second. Let me flip cameras again. And this, I'm not going to be able to answer questions on this because I'm going to have to sign off really fast.
Put this up. Cool. So I did put a video out on the new color editing coming. I still have a ton. Oops, I got Brian's chat still there. Sorry. All right, one sec. I'm not even going to put the pommel on this hilt, so forgive me for having an exposed board. Let me see. All right, so I'm still doing a ton of work on this, but I've actually stepped up. So part of edit mode, a big piece that I'm actually working on with her right now is color editing. And I just put a video out over the weekend because I finally got a piece working, but I've actually been doing more work on it. So I wanted to show that real quick and then probably talk about it a little bit more next week. Let me see what I need to do. Oops, nope, that's not it.
Select preset. Load data.
All right, so this is, so I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions. It's probably a mistake showing this at the very end of the show, but I meant to. Color editing, coming to edit mode, is different than color change. It's actually a completely separate mechanism, and it's going to do a lot more. So actually, let's turn this off. Let's go into edit mode.
Edit mode. Edit style.
So you've seen this, but
Edit color.
edit color is now its own mode.
Select color.
And what's going to happen?
Base color. Edit color.
Now, so originally the idea behind color editing, so normal color wheel, right, changes your color based on turning your hilt, lets you go through all the colors. That's normal color change. But it can't do white, it can't do dimming. So in talking to Frederick, actually a bunch of back and forth, we were looking at how to get the ability to go white, how the ability to dim the blade, essentially near black, plus color editing. So the original one that I had over the weekend, you would tip your blade up and you'd be able to change the white value. You tip your blade down, you'd be able to change the black value. I'm actually changing that control. It's still in works. But so right now I'm in normal color mode. And this uses a dynamic control. So if you turn really slow, it lets you do really subtle changes. If I turn big changes, it'll jump colors. So this lets you kind of get through that color real quickly. But then when you get near a color, if you slow down how much you're turning, it actually takes really small steps. So it's to be able to fine tune that color really nicely. So it's taking the color zoom concept and building it in based on this, how much you're turning your hilt. But now the white and the black, instead of having to hold the blade up and down while you're editing them, you're going to toggle. So if I tip the blade up,
White level.
I'm in white level.
Minimum setting.
And now
Minimum setting.
I can, oops, I jumped. Went too quick. Now I can get to white, and I can turn it back down.
Setting.
Then if I tip up again,
Minimum setting. Edit color.
now it goes back to color. Because what I was finding is having to hold that blade up and edit your color got really weird. So now tipping up toggles to white, bring it down here, edit it, tip up again, toggles to color, bring it back down. And now if I want to do the black level,
Black level.
tip it down, come to the,
Maximum setting.
and then I can dim.
Minimum setting.
And we set, I set the minimum setting at 10% right now.
Setting.
I know, I have to work on some of the stuff still. But now if I want to get back to color, I tip down again.
Edit color.
And now it's going to stay dim, but it's going to let me go through the dimmer colors. And then if I wanted to brighten it up, I have two ways to brighten it up. I can tip up,
White level.
go to the white level, and I can bring it back up into regular range. And then I can go past it and start going towards my whites. So instead of having to keep that blade,
Minimum setting.
I know.
Minimum setting.
All right, stop talking back to me. So I'm still working on the prompts. The sensitivity is a little high, but I wanted to show that. So the big thing, and hopefully you guys will be able to hear me. I actually didn't check if you could hear me.
Select color.
Oops,
Select color.
I know.
Swing color. Edit color. Revert. Select color. Exit.
There we go. Lost my spice. So let me switch back. I'll take 2 seconds to explain. Hopefully you guys are hearing me. If you didn't hear me, that was a big waste of time. Cool, let's see. Cool. So yeah, Yep. So the white level and black level, they are brightness. I split them. So the original concept was going to be an overall brightness control. I purposely split it with the up and down because what the way it works is the normal color wheel is essentially 50% brightness. It's the middle. If you wanted to be able to get back to that middle point, we needed to create a breakpoint. So white level is 50% to 100% brightness. Black level is 50% to 0% brightness. And I have the wrong camera on. Sorry about that. And hopefully you guys are hearing me. Oops, wrong screen. That's going to look really weird. There we go. It's essentially, it was two, I split it for usage so that it made more sense. Because if you start going white and then you can't, and then you all of a sudden change your mind, you can revert everything in edit mode. But if you wanted to start moving back towards the original color, that 50% brightness, we needed a breakpoint. So that's essentially the reason. But yeah, it's essentially what you're doing is you're changing the brightness. When you go full 100% bright, it's actually white. If you go full 100%, full 0% brightness, it actually turns the blade black. But because black is also the off color, for right now, I put a floor on edit mode. That might adjust. This is still early in development. I still have a ton I'm working on with it, but I wanted to show that just through usage, having that blade standing up and trying to turn it, it just was weird. And it didn't work as well as I wanted to. So that's why now the plan will be if you're and you can also change the mode when you start. So if you start with the blade up, go into color editing, it's going to automatically be white mode, and you'll get your white adjustment. If you wanted to change the color mode, you'll tip up. That'll toggle the color mode. You go back, do your colors. If you want to dim it, tip down, goes to black mode, change your dim, tip down again, go back to your color. So it lets you. Essentially, the goal of the new color editing is to hit every possible color, with the exception of pure black right now, all through adjusting not only the hue, but also the brightness level. So you can get like silvers, essentially a silverish is a blue with the white applied, but it's not full white. So you can do all that. So the new color editor is going to do a lot more colors than the color wheel will. So hopefully, again, I was planning on showing you a little earlier and leaving some time for it, but I was answering questions. But we'll talk more about it. And I hope to have more done by next week. This is, again, I've been saying a lot. This is the teeniest little tip of the iceberg, even what you guys have seen so far. So there's a lot. I'm working on a lot, but I also, Frederick is making a lot of this possible. So the the menu sounds, thanks again to Brian for them. They will be so rough plan, nothing finalized yet, is there will be a common folder available that plays all the menu sounds. And they have been contributed by Brian. I've been bothering the heck out of him for sounds. As I said earlier, I'm not the sound guy. I depend on the skill set of others. So thank you, Brian Connor, who's on the chat right now, for all the sounds you heard in edit mode. They will be available when edit mode releases so that you guys have them. But just like everything else, if you have font makers, if you make your own, you can just interchange them. It's just for everything to work. The menus, when edit mode comes out, there's going to be a common folder available. I believe Frederick hasn't. I think Frederick said we can put it in the OS, but I'm still working that part out. But it'll be available somehow. You'll have the sounds available. The default will be the ones Brian has made for me, which sound awesome. So thank you again for that. But if you want your own custom ones, you'll always be able to do it. Now, and Brian will attest to this. You guys, again, tip of the iceberg. There's so many more sounds that you guys haven't come into play with. So don't go trying to build out menu sounds yet, because the menu's not even done. There's a lot coming. Brian has a little insight because he made some of the sounds, but even he hasn't seen everything yet. But I've been rambling on a little long. I want to thank everybody for coming in tonight. Hopefully you learned a little bit about blade angle. Hopefully I answered the questions. If there's anything that I missed, if I missed your chat, I apologize. It's not intentional. And I'll try to, if you have questions specific for the show, I should be on next week if we're seeing anything. If you have any questions that didn't get answered and you want to ask them for next week, you can hit me up ahead of time, like Brian did, and I'll try to fit it in and cover it, or you can ask me in the chat. So thanks so much, everybody. Hope you all have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.